Tokyo Bay, September 2nd, 1945. A Japanese foreign minister with a cane walks across the deck of an American battleship, surrounded by the warships of the nations his country spent 4 years fighting. He picks up a pen. He signs his name. 23 minutes later, the deadliest war in human history is officially over. 70 million people are dead. 6 years of fighting across 6 continents, across 3 oceans, in deserts and frozen forests and Pacific islands that most people had never heard of before soldiers started dying on them. Cities reduced to ash. Entire countries occupied, torn apart, and rebuilt from nothing. A weapon used for the first time that could erase a city in 43 seconds. The war did not end in a single moment. It ended because of 10 events that broke one side completely and left the other with no choice but to walk onto that battleship deck and sign. This is what those 10 events were. Section 1. The Battle of Stalingrad. Berlin, August 1942. The German war machine is moving east. For 3 years, Adolf Hitler's armies have torn through Europe. Poland fell in weeks. France collapsed in 6 weeks. Country after country has buckled under the weight of German tanks and aircraft. And now, in the summer of 1942, Hitler has turned his full attention to the Soviet Union. His plan is simple and brutal. Drive deep into Soviet territory, seize the oil fields of the Caucasus region, cut the Soviet supply lines that run along the Volga River, and destroy the city that bears the name of his greatest enemy, Joseph Stalin. The city is called Stalingrad. It sits on the western bank of the Volga River in southwestern Russia. It is a major center for Soviet industry. Factories there produce tanks, weapons, and ammunition that keep the Red Army fighting. Whoever controls Stalingrad controls the river. Whoever controls the river controls the flow of supplies, keeping the Soviet war effort alive. Hitler understands this. Stalin understands this. And so, in the summer of 1942, both men make Stalingrad the center of the war. On August 23, 1942, the German 6th Army, one of the most powerful fighting forces on the planet, begins its assault on the city. Within days, German aircraft drop thousands of bombs on Stalingrad. Entire city blocks are reduced to rubble. Fires burn across the waterfront. Civilians die by the thousands in the opening days of the attack. The city is being torn apart before the serious fighting has even begun. What happens next changes the war forever. The Soviet commander defending Stalingrad is General Vasily Chuikov. Chuikov makes a decision that seems almost insane at first. Rather than pulling his troops back and trying to hold a clean defensive line, he orders them to move closer to the Germans. His logic is cold and calculated. If Soviet soldiers are close enough to the Germans, German aircraft cannot bomb them without hitting their own men. Chuikov calls this tactic hugging the enemy. His soldiers call it something else entirely. They call it living inside the ruins. And that is exactly what the Battle of Stalingrad becomes. A battle fought inside ruins, room by room, floor by floor, staircase by staircase. German soldiers who have been trained to fight open field battles with tanks and aircraft now find themselves in a city that has been bombed into a maze of broken concrete and collapsed buildings. They cannot use their greatest advantages. They have to fight the Soviets at close range, in small spaces, in the dark. Every building becomes a fortress. Every pile of rubble becomes a battlefield. The fighting goes on for weeks, then months. By November 1942, the German 6th Army is deep inside Stalingrad. Its soldiers have fought their way to the banks of the Volga River. On a map, it looks like Germany is winning. The army has pushed nearly all the way through the city, but the Soviets have not broken. They keep bringing fresh soldiers across the Volga at night, under fire, feeding men into the battle one unit at a time. The cost is enormous. Soviet soldiers are dying by the tens of thousands, but they are not giving up the city. And then, on November 19, 1942, the Soviets make their move. While the German 6th Army has been grinding through the streets of Stalingrad, the Soviet commanders have been quietly building up enormous forces on both sides of the German advance. To the north, to the south. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, tanks, and artillery guns positioned and waiting. On November 19th, Those forces attack at the same time from both directions. The operation is called Uranus. Within 4 days, the Soviet forces close the trap. The entire German Sixth Army, nearly 300,000 soldiers, is surrounded. Hitler orders the Sixth Army to stand and fight. He tells them that supply aircraft will bring everything they need. He tells them that a relief force is coming to break through the encirclement. Neither of these things happens the way he promises. The supply flights are not enough. The relief force gets close but cannot break through. And the winter comes down on the surrounded German soldiers with a force that no one in Berlin seems to have fully prepared for. Temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero. German soldiers are wearing summer uniforms. They are rationing food to a fraction of what a person needs to survive. Medical supplies run out. Men are dying from wounds, from cold, from hunger, from disease. The Sixth Army, which arrived in Stalingrad as one of the most powerful military forces in the world, is slowly being destroyed. On January 31st, 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, the commander of the Sixth Army, surrenders. He disobeys Hitler's direct order to fight to the last man. He looks at what is left of his army, 91,000 frozen, starving men, and he gives up. 2 days later, on February 2nd, 1943, the last remaining German soldiers inside Stalingrad lay down their weapons. The battle is over. The numbers from Stalingrad are almost impossible to process. The Axis forces, German, Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian, suffered around 800,000 casualties, including the dead, the wounded, and those taken prisoner. The Soviet side suffered even more. Nearly 480,000 Soviet soldiers died in the defense of the city. Roughly 40,000 civilians perished. In 5 months of fighting, around 2 million people became casualties in and around one city. Only around 6,000 of the 91,000 German prisoners taken at Stalingrad ever returned home to Germany. For Hitler, Stalingrad is more than a military defeat. It is the moment the war on the Eastern Front turns against Germany for good. Before Stalingrad, German forces had been moving forward, taking territory, winning battles. After Stalingrad, they never fully recover. The destruction of 2 entire German armies, men, weapons, tanks, and supplies that cannot be replaced, leaves a wound in Germany's military strength that does not heal. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad becomes a symbol of something enormous. Proof that the German army can be stopped. Proof that the Red Army can not only survive, but strike back and win. From this moment forward, Soviet forces begin pushing west, slowly at first, then faster. The road from Stalingrad runs all the way to Berlin. But Stalingrad alone does not end the war. Germany is wounded, but not finished. To deliver the next blow, the Allies need to open a second front on the other side of Europe, a front that has been planned, debated, and delayed for over 2 years. What is coming next is the largest sea invasion in the history of warfare, and the men preparing to carry it out know that if it fails, the war could drag on for years more. Section 2. D-Day, the Normandy Landings. England, June 5, 1944, midnight. Along the southern coast of England, the largest military force ever assembled in human history is waiting. Nearly 160,000 soldiers from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and 12 other allied nations are packed into ships, landing craft, and aircraft. Over 7,000 naval vessels sit in the water. Around 12,000 aircraft are ready to fly. The men are quiet. Some are writing letters home, some are praying. All of them know what the morning will bring. For 4 years, Nazi Germany has occupied France. German soldiers control the French coastline. German commanders have spent years building defenses along the beaches. Concrete walls, barbed wire, landmines, heavy guns pointed out toward the sea. The man in charge of those defenses is Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, one of Germany's most respected military minds. Rommel believes that if the Allies ever attempt a landing on those beaches, they must be stopped on the sand itself. Push them back into the water, he argues, or lose everything. The Allied commander is General Dwight D. Eisenhower. On the evening of June 5th, after days of bad weather that have already delayed the operation, Eisenhower makes on the next for the call. The weather is going to open up, briefly. A narrow window exists. The invasion will go on June 6th. He sits down and writes a short note by hand, a message to be used if the whole thing fails. He dates it July 5th by mistake. Then he sends his men into the night. Just after midnight on June 6, 1944, 23,400 Allied paratroopers drop out of 822 aircraft over Normandy, France. They land in the dark behind the German defensive lines. Their job is to protect the sides of the beach landings from German reinforcements. Many of them land miles from where they are supposed to be. Some drown in flooded fields. Some are killed before they hit the ground. But enough of them reach their positions to start causing confusion inside the German command. At 6:30 in the morning, the landings begin. American soldiers hit Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. British soldiers hit Gold Beach and Sword Beach. Canadian soldiers hit Juno Beach. On 4 of the 5 beaches, the fighting is brutal, but the Allied forces push through. On Omaha Beach, the situation becomes something close to a disaster. The specialized equipment meant to help the soldiers get ashore is largely lost before it reaches the beach. The German defenses at Omaha are stronger than expected. The first waves of American soldiers walk into a wall of fire the moment their landing craft doors open. Over 2,000 Americans become casualties on Omaha Beach alone on June 6th. The sand turns red. But the soldiers keep coming. By the end of June 6, 1944, all 5 beaches are in Allied hands. The total Allied casualties for the day, killed, wounded, and missing across all 5 beaches, exceed 10,300. At least 4,414 Allied soldiers are confirmed killed on that single day, including 2,501 Americans. In terms of lives lost, it is one of the most costly single days the Allied forces experience in the entire war. On the German side, the response is badly damaged by confusion at the top. Rommel is away from his headquarters on the morning of the invasion. He has gone home to Germany for his wife's birthday, believing the bad weather makes an Allied landing impossible that week. When the news reaches him, he races back. Hitler, meanwhile, believes through most of the morning that the Normandy landing is a trick, a fake attack designed to pull German forces away from a bigger landing further north. He refuses to release his reserve tank forces to push the Allies back into the sea. By the time German commanders are given freedom to move those reserves, it is too late. Within 6 days of June 6th, the Allies have 326,000 troops, more than 50,000 vehicles, and 100,000 tons of equipment on French soil. By June 30th, those numbers have grown to over 850,000 men, 148,000 vehicles, and 570,000 tons of supplies. The scale of the Allied buildup is something German forces cannot match. By August 1944, all of northern France is in Allied hands. German forces are retreating east toward their own border. The door into Germany is open. D-Day does not end the war. Germany still has millions of soldiers under arms and will fight on for nearly another year. But June 6, 1944, permanently changes the shape of the war. Before that morning, Germany fights on one major front in the west. After that morning, it is caught between the Soviets pushing from the east and the Allies driving from the west. The pressure on Germany from both directions is building month by month. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Hitler knows this, and in December 1944, he decides to try one final, desperate gamble to change everything. He is going to strike back through a place no one expects, a dense forest on the Belgian border, and he is going to do it in the dead of winter. Section 3. The Battle of the Bulge. Belgium. December 16, 1944. Before dawn. The Allied commanders are feeling confident. France has been liberated. German forces have been pushed back to their own border. Some Allied generals are predicting the war will be over by Christmas. The front line in the Ardennes, a thick, heavily forested region stretching across Belgium and Luxembourg, is quiet. Allied commanders consider it a safe, low-risk stretch of the line. They station fewer troops there than almost anywhere else, keeping their stronger forces concentrated in areas where they expect the real fighting to happen. Hitler is counting on exactly that. In secret, the previous weeks, Germany has been moving men and machines into position along that quiet stretch of forest, moving only at night, maintaining total radio silence, hiding tanks and artillery under the cover of the trees. The buildup is enormous. More than 200,000 German soldiers, nearly 1,000 tanks, assembled in darkness, in silence, waiting. At 5:30 in the morning on December 16, 1944, the Germans opened fire along an 80-mile stretch of the Allied front line. The attack hits 4 American divisions that are either exhausted from previous fighting or completely new to combat. The shock is total. Men who went to sleep expecting another quiet night wake up to artillery shells landing in their camps. Units lose contact with each other. Officers cannot reach their commanders. The front line, in certain places, simply collapses. The German plan is ambitious. Drive west through the Ardennes at full speed, cross the Meuse River, capture the massive Allied supply port at Antwerp, Belgium, split the British and American armies in two, surround them, force the Western Allies to negotiate a peace. With the West neutralized, Germany could then turn everything back toward the east and face the Soviet advance on a single front. Hitler believes this is his last real chance to change the outcome of the war. In the opening days, the Germans make alarming progress. The attack creates a large bulge pushing westward into the Allied lines, which is where the battle gets its name. American units are cut off, surrounded, or forced to retreat. The town of Bastogne becomes a critical point. The 101st Airborne Division and supporting units find themselves completely surrounded by German forces. The Germans send a formal demand for their surrender. The American commander at Bastogne, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, sends back a one-word reply: nuts. The surrounded Americans hold Bastogne. They are cold, low on ammunition, low on food, and completely encircled. But they do not give up the town. Bastogne sits at the center of a network of roads that the German advance desperately needs. As long as the Americans hold it, the German push west is squeezed and slowed. The weather, which has grounded Allied aircraft since the attack began, finally breaks on December 23rd. Within hours, Allied planes are in the sky, attacking German tanks, supply columns, and troop formations. The skies over the Ardennes fill with Allied aircraft that the German advance had been sheltered from for a full week. German vehicles, many of which are already running dangerously low on fuel after failing to capture Allied fuel depots, begin to break down or get destroyed from the air. On December 26th, General George Patton's Third Army reaches Bastogne from the south, breaking the encirclement. On January 3, 1945, the American First Army launches a counterattack from the north. The two forces squeeze the bulge from both sides. The Germans, who have exhausted their fuel and taken losses they cannot replace, begin pulling back. By January 25, 1945, they have been pushed all the way back to where they started. The cost of the battle is staggering on both sides. The United States suffers well over 80,000 casualties during the Battle of the Bulge. The official army count records 19,246 Americans killed. More than 23,000 American soldiers are taken prisoner. The Battle of the Bulge represents roughly 10% of all American combat casualties in the entire war, concentrated into a single 6-week battle. Germany loses approximately 100,000 men who cannot be replaced. Tanks and artillery and aircraft destroyed or abandoned in the snow. Fuel reserves burned through in a gamble that fails completely. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, speaking to his parliament in January 1945, calls the Battle of the Bulge the greatest American battle of the war. After January 25, 1945, Germany has no significant offensive capability left in the West. Its armies can now only retreat. The last reserves have been spent. The last gamble has failed. Allied forces begin pushing east toward the German border with nothing in front of them capable of stopping the advance for long. To the east, the Soviet Red Army is already moving. A massive Soviet offensive launched in January 1945 is driving deep into German-held territory. Berlin itself is within reach. And inside that city, in the weeks ahead, Adolf Hitler is about to make the final decision of his life. Section 4. The Fall of Berlin and Hitler's Death. Berlin, April 1945. The city is dying. For months, Allied aircraft have been dropping bombs on Berlin around the clock. British bombers come at night. American bombers come during the day. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. The streets are full of broken glass, collapsed buildings, and the smell of smoke. Water and electricity are cut in large parts of the city. Civilians shelter in basements and underground stations, coming out only when they have to. Everyone in Berlin knows the end is coming. The only question is how bad it will be when it arrives. By April 16, 1945, the Soviet Red Army has assembled more than 1.5 million soldiers on the eastern edge of Berlin. These are battle-hardened men who have been fighting their way west since Stalingrad. They have crossed Poland, crushed German defenses line by line, and now they are here, at the gates of the German capital. The force they have brought is overwhelming. Thousands of tanks, thousands of artillery guns, aircraft covering the sky. The Soviet commander orders a night bombardment to open the assault. Witnesses describe the horizon lighting up as if the sun is rising in the wrong direction. More than 9,000 artillery guns open fire at once. The noise is heard hundreds of miles away. Then the ground forces move forward. The German forces defending Berlin are a shadow of what they once were. The best German units have been destroyed at Stalingrad, at Normandy, in the Ardennes. What remains in Berlin is a desperate collection of exhausted soldiers, older men pulled out of civilian life, and boys as young as 16 who have been handed rifles and told to defend the capital. Hitler has ordered every German to fight to the last breath. He has made it a crime punishable by death to retreat without orders. Officers are being executed in the streets for failing to hold their positions. None of it can stop what is coming. Soviet forces fight their way into Berlin block by block, building by building, in scenes that echo the street fighting of Stalingrad 2 years earlier. The Germans defend every major intersection, every bridge, every government building. The fighting is savage. Civilians are caught in the middle. The Red Army suffers around 350,000 casualties taking the city. German military casualties reach at least 450,000. An estimated 300,000 civilians are killed or wounded. Through all of this, Adolf Hitler remains underground. He has been living in a bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery building in central Berlin since January. The bunker is a series of concrete rooms built deep below the ground, connected by narrow corridors. It has its own water supply, its own electricity generator, its own telephone lines. Hitler runs what remains of the German war from inside these rooms, issuing orders to armies that barely exist anymore, moving units on maps that no longer reflect reality. On April 29, 1945, with Soviet soldiers fighting their way through the streets directly above his head, Hitler marries his longtime companion Eva Braun in a small ceremony inside the bunker. He then sits down and writes his final will and political statement. In it, he He blames the war on others. He gives instructions for what should happen after he is gone. He appoints Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor. The following afternoon, April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler shoots himself in the head inside his private room in the bunker. Eva Braun dies beside him, having swallowed poison. Following Hitler's prior instructions, staff members carry both bodies up through the bunker's emergency exit into the garden above, pour fuel over them, and set them on fire. Soviet soldiers later identify Hitler's remains through his dental records. The next day, May 1st, Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's closest propaganda minister and one of the last senior figures still in the bunker, poisons his 6 children with cyanide, and then takes his own life along with his wife Magda. On May 2, 1945, the German garrison commander in Berlin, General Helmuth Weidling, formally surrenders the city to Soviet forces. The fighting in Berlin stops. Soviet soldiers raise their flag over the ruins of the Reichstag building, the old German parliament, and photograph it. That image travels around the world within days. 5 days later, on May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally to the Allied forces in the West. The following day, May 8th, the surrender takes effect. The war in Europe is over. In cities across Britain, the United States, and liberated Europe, people pour into the streets. There is dancing, there are tears. Church bells ring for hours. But the war is not over everywhere. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Thousands of miles to the east, in the islands and jungles of the Pacific Ocean, Japan is still fighting. Japanese forces have shown, island by island, that they will not stop. American commanders are already calculating what it will cost to invade the Japanese home islands. The estimates are catastrophic. And in a laboratory in the desert of New Mexico, a weapon unlike anything the world has ever seen is almost ready. Section 5. Germany's Unconditional Surrender. Reims, France, May 7, 1945, 2:41 in the morning. In a red brick schoolhouse that has been converted into Allied military headquarters, a German general named Alfred Jodl sits down at a table and picks up a pen. Around him stand Allied officers representing the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The room is plain. The lighting is harsh. There are no celebrations yet. Just the scratch of a pen on paper and the sound of men breathing in a quiet room. Jodl signs the documents in front of him. With those signatures, the German armed forces surrender unconditionally to the Allied powers. Every German soldier on every front, in every country, on every ocean, they are all covered by what Jodl signs in that schoolhouse in the early hours of May 7, 1945. The surrender takes effect the following day, May 8th, at 1 minute past midnight. That date, May 8th, 1945, becomes known as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. Getting to that moment has taken everything. After Hitler's death on April 30th, Admiral Karl Donitz takes over as the head of what remains of the German government. Donitz tries to negotiate a partial surrender, one that would allow German forces in the east to keep fighting the Soviets while surrendering only to the Western Allies. His reasoning is straightforward. German soldiers are terrified of Soviet captivity. They have seen what the war in the East has produced, the sheer scale of death and destruction, and many would rather surrender to American or British forces than fall into Soviet hands. Donitz wants to buy time to move as many German soldiers and civilians westward as possible before the fighting stops completely. The Western Allied commanders refuse a partial deal. The Soviets, who have lost more people in this war than any other nation on Earth, are not willing to accept anything less than a full and complete surrender on all fronts simultaneously. The negotiations are tense but brief. Germany has no real cards left to play. On May 7th, Jodl signs at Reims, but the Soviets insist on a second separate signing ceremony in Berlin on Soviet-controlled territory to make clear that Germany has surrendered to all of the Allied powers equally. That second ceremony takes place on May 8th in the Berlin suburb of Karlshorst. German Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel signs the surrender documents before Soviet, American, British, and French commanders. The war in Europe is formally, finally, completely over. The scale of what Germany's defeat means is difficult to take in all at once. The war in Europe has lasted 5 years and 8 months, beginning with the German invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939. In that time, Germany has occupied or controlled most of the European continent. It has carried out the systematic murder of 6 million Jewish people in what becomes known as the Holocaust, along with millions of others including Soviet civilians, Polish civilians, people with disabilities, Roma, and political prisoners. Its armies have fought from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen plains of the Soviet Union. By the time the guns stop on May 8th, an estimated 40 to 60 million people have died in the war in Europe and beyond. Entire cities have been reduced to ruins. Millions of people are homeless, without food, without clean water, separated from their families, displaced from their home countries. The continent of Europe is, in large parts, physically destroyed. In London, crowds fill the streets around Buckingham Palace and do not leave for hours. Prime Minister Winston Churchill appears on a balcony, and the noise from the crowd below is heard streets away. In New York, Times Square fills with people the moment the news arrives. In cities across the Soviet Union, people weep in the streets, weep for the victory, and weep for the dead. Because the Soviet Union has lost somewhere between 27 and 30 million people during the war. There is no city, no town, no village in the entire country that has not lost someone. Germany is now divided into 4 zones of occupation, one each controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. The country that started the war no longer exists as a functioning state. Its military is dissolved, its government is gone, its cities are rubble. But the celebrations on May 8th are not yet the end of the war. They are the end of the war in one half of the world. In the Pacific, Japan fights on. Japanese forces have been pushed back across thousands of miles of ocean over 3 years of brutal island fighting. They have suffered enormous losses, and still, they will not surrender. American military planners, preparing for what they expect will be a full invasion of the Japanese home islands, are producing casualty estimates that run into the hundreds of thousands of American soldiers dead, and potentially millions of Japanese. There is a weapon sitting in a laboratory in New Mexico that changes those calculations completely. It has just been tested for the first time, and the men who built it are already making preparations to use it. Section 6. The Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima. Hiroshima, Japan, August 6, 1945, 8:15 in the morning. The city is waking up. Children are walking to school, workers are heading to factories, streetcars are running their morning routes. The population of Hiroshima is somewhere around 340,000 people. It is a warm summer morning and the sky is clear and blue. High above the city, at around 31,000 feet, a single American B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay is flying. The aircraft carries a crew of 12 men and a single bomb. The bomb is nicknamed Little Boy. It weighs around 9,700 pounds. It has never been dropped on a city before. Nothing like it has ever been dropped on a city before. At 8:15 in the morning, Little Boy falls from the Enola Gay. It takes 43 seconds to fall. At 1,800 feet above the city center, the bomb explodes. The force of the explosion is equal to around 12,500 tons of standard explosives going off at the same moment. A fireball appears above Hiroshima that is roughly 1,200 feet across. The temperature at the center of the explosion reaches several million degrees. On the ground directly below, the heat is so extreme that people and objects within a certain radius are vaporized, turned to ash and shadow, in fractions of a second. 5 square miles of the city center are destroyed almost instantly. Around 70% of all buildings in Hiroshima are either destroyed or severely damaged. The city's hospitals, its fire stations, its water supply systems, all of it is gone or broken in the first moments. Fires start across the entire city and burn for hours with nothing to stop them, because the firefighters and their equipment are gone. Within the first 4 days following the explosion, an estimated 120,000 people are dead. By the end of 1945, the death toll reaches an estimated 140,000 people. The deaths do not stop when the fires go out. In the weeks and months that follow, People who were far enough from the explosion to survive the initial blast begin dying from radiation sickness. Their hair falls out. Their bodies stop producing healthy blood cells. Children who seemed physically unhurt in the immediate aftermath become ill and die weeks later. In the years following the bombing, survivors face elevated rates of leukemia and cancer that last for the rest of their lives. The 12 men aboard the Enola Gay feel the shockwave hit the aircraft 43 seconds after the bomb is released. The tail gunner, looking back at the city, later describes seeing a column of smoke rising and a city that has disappeared beneath it. The co-pilot writes in his personal log that the sight is one that he cannot find words to properly describe. Back in Washington, President Harry Truman is aboard a ship in the Atlantic when the news reaches him. He makes a public statement describing the weapon and warning Japan of what comes next. He calls Hiroshima a military base, which is not an accurate description of what Hiroshima primarily is. The full scale of what has happened to the civilian population of the city takes time to become clear to the outside world, partly because the destruction has wiped out most of the city's ability to communicate with the rest of Japan. In Tokyo, the Japanese government receives fragmented reports in the hours after the bombing. They do not immediately understand what kind of weapon has been used. Japanese military officials send an aircraft to fly over Hiroshima and report back. The pilot describes finding nothing below him but a city that has been erased. A flat, burning wasteland where a major city stood that morning. Japan does not surrender immediately after Hiroshima. This is one of the most important and most debated facts about the end of the Pacific War. The Japanese government, specifically the inner circle of military and government leaders known as the Supreme Council, is divided. 3 of the 6 members of that council want to keep fighting, even after Hiroshima. They believe that if Japan can inflict enough casualties on an American invasion force, the United States will agree to a negotiated peace rather than a full, unconditional surrender. They are willing to continue the war on those terms. The other 3 members of the council, including the foreign minister, believe the situation is hopeless and that surrender is the only path forward. The council is deadlocked. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While that deadlock holds in Tokyo, 2 more things are about to happen in rapid succession that together will break it completely. One of them is a second bomb, already being prepared on an island in the Pacific. The other is the entry of a massive military power that Japan has been desperately hoping would stay out of the war. Both of them arrive on the same day. Section 7. The Soviet Declaration of War on Japan and the Invasion of Manchuria. Moscow, August 8, 1945, late evening. Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov summons the Japanese ambassador to his office. The ambassador arrives expecting a diplomatic meeting. What he receives instead is a formal declaration of war. The Soviet Union, Molotov informs him, will consider itself at war with Japan beginning the following day, August 9, 1945. The ambassador is shattered. Japan has been secretly hoping for months that the Soviet Union would help negotiate a peace deal with the United States, one that might allow Japan to surrender on better terms than a full, unconditional surrender. Japanese leaders had been sending quiet messages to Moscow, asking Soviet leaders to act as a go-between. They believed the Soviets might be willing to help because the 2 countries had signed a neutrality agreement in 1941, promising not to fight each other. Japan had been counting on that agreement holding. It does not hold. What the Japanese did not know was that the Soviet Union had already secretly promised the United States and Great Britain, at a meeting in February 1945 at Yalta in Crimea, that it would declare war on Japan within 3 months of Germany's defeat. Germany surrendered on May 8th. 3 months later is August 8th. The Soviets keep their promise to the Allies to the day. As Molotov is delivering the declaration of war to the Japanese ambassador in Moscow, more than 1 million Soviet soldiers are already moving into position along the borders of Manchuria. Manchuria is a large region in northeastern China that Japan has occupied and controlled since 1931. It is home to significant Japanese military forces, the Kwantung Army, and major industrial facilities that supply the Japanese war effort. Taking Manchuria would cut off a critical source of Japanese military strength. At 2 minutes past midnight on August 9th, Soviet forces crossed the border into Manchuria simultaneously from three directions: from the north, from the west, from the east. The scale of the operation is enormous. Over 1.5 million Soviet soldiers are deployed across a front that stretches for thousands of miles. They bring with them thousands of tanks, artillery guns, and aircraft. The Japanese forces in Manchuria are caught almost completely off guard. The Kwantung Army, which was once one of Japan's most powerful military forces, has been severely weakened over the previous years. Its best units and most experienced soldiers had been transferred to other parts of the Pacific War as Japan's situation worsened elsewhere. What remains in Manchuria is a force that is significantly under strength and poorly equipped compared to the massive Soviet force now driving toward them from multiple directions at once. The Soviet advance moves with a speed that the Japanese cannot counter. On the western side of the attack, Soviet armored columns drive across the Inner Mongolian desert, covering 55 miles on the first day alone. Japanese border defenses, where they exist at all, are overrun or bypassed. Units that try to form defensive lines find themselves outflanked before they can organize. Communication between Japanese units breaks down. Commanders lose contact with their forces. Within the first 2 days of fighting, the scale of the Soviet advance makes it clear to Japanese commanders in Manchuria that organized resistance is not going to hold. In Tokyo, the news from Manchuria lands on top of the news from Hiroshima 3 days earlier. Emperor Hirohito has already been receiving reports about the atomic bomb's destruction of Hiroshima. Now, the Soviet Union, the one major power Japan had been hoping might help them find a way out, has entered the war on the other side. The last diplomatic option Japan believed it had is gone. The effect on the Supreme Council is immediate. The three members who had been insisting Japan could still fight begin to waver. Emperor Hirohito, who under Japan's system of government holds enormous symbolic and spiritual authority over the nation, begins pushing his council toward acceptance of the Allied surrender terms. The military hardliners still resist. The argument inside the Japanese government becomes increasingly desperate as the hours pass and the Soviet advance in Manchuria continues to accelerate. By the time the fighting in Manchuria ends, the results are overwhelming. Most of Manchuria and large portions of Korea are in Soviet hands within 11 days of the invasion's start. Japanese forces in Manchuria suffer around 80,000 killed. The Soviets lose approximately 8,000 soldiers in the same period. The Kwantung Army, which Japan had depended on as a major reserve force, is effectively destroyed as a fighting force in less than 2 weeks. The Soviet entry into the Pacific War matters enormously to the final days of the conflict for reasons that go beyond the battlefield. Japan's entire strategy for avoiding a full, unconditional surrender had rested on the belief that it could make any invasion so costly that the United States would eventually accept a negotiated peace. Central to that strategy was the idea that Japan still had large reserves of soldiers in Manchuria and China that had not yet been committed to the fight. The Soviet invasion destroys that reserve. The buffer that Japan believed it still had is gone. On August 20th, 1945, Japanese forces in Manchuria agree to a ceasefire. In the ruins of Hiroshima, survivors are still being pulled from collapsed buildings. In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito is preparing to do something no Japanese emperor has ever done in the modern history of the country. And on the island of Tinian in the Pacific, the second atomic bomb has already been dropped on a Japanese city, a city called Nagasaki, and the world is waiting to see what Japan will do next. Section 8. The Atomic Bombing of Nagasaki. Tinian Island, Pacific Ocean, August 9, 1945, before dawn. An American B-29 bomber called Bockscar is being prepared for its mission. The aircraft and its crew have been assigned to carry the second atomic bomb, a weapon nicknamed Fat Man, to a Japanese city. The original target for the mission is a city called Kokura. Nagasaki is the backup. Bockscar takes off in the early hours of August 9th and flies toward Japan. The crew encounters problems almost immediately. A fuel pump failure means that a significant portion of the aircraft's fuel supply cannot be used during the flight. The crew presses on anyway. When they reach Kokura, they find the city covered in thick cloud and smoke from fires burning in a nearby city that had been bombed the previous day. The bombardier cannot get a clear visual on the target below. Military rules for this mission require a visual drop. The crew circles Kokura 3 times, burning through fuel they cannot afford to lose, looking for a break in the clouds. The break never comes. Boxcar turns south toward Nagasaki. Nagasaki is a port city on the western coast of the Japanese island of Kyushu. It has a population of around 250,000 people at the time of the bombing. The city sits in a valley between hills, which will have a significant effect on how the explosion spreads. Nagasaki is also home to major shipbuilding facilities and weapons manufacturing plants that have been contributing to the Japanese war effort. At 11:02 in the morning on August 9, 1945, Fat Man explodes 1,650 feet above the northern part of Nagasaki. Fat Man is a different design from the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Where Little Boy used uranium, Fat Man uses plutonium. Fat Man produces a larger explosion, roughly equivalent to 21,000 tons of standard explosives. The fireball it creates is enormous. Ground temperatures in the area directly below the explosion reach 4,000 degrees Celsius. Concrete buildings collapse. Wooden structures simply cease to exist. The hills surrounding Nagasaki contain the blast to some degree, preventing it from spreading as widely as the Hiroshima explosion did across that flatter city. But within the valley where the bomb explodes, the destruction is total. Around 40,000 people are killed instantly or within the first hours of the bombing. By the end of 1945, the death toll in Nagasaki reaches an estimated 74,000 people. As in Hiroshima, the deaths continue long after the explosion itself. Radiation sickness kills people in the days and weeks that follow. Cancer and other illnesses connected to radiation exposure claim more lives in the years afterward. Children who survive the initial blast grow up carrying the effects of radiation in their bodies. Among the dead in Nagasaki are 11 American prisoners of war being held in the city. They are among the first American casualties of the atomic bomb. The destruction of Nagasaki does not happen in isolation. It falls on the same day that Soviet forces cross into Manchuria. Emperor Hirohito and his Supreme Council receive the news of Nagasaki on top of everything else that is already crashing down on them that day. The Soviet declaration of war, the Soviet invasion of Manchuria, the reports still coming in from Hiroshima 3 days earlier, and now a second city has been destroyed by a single bomb. Inside the Supreme Council, the 3 military hardliners who have been insisting Japan must keep fighting are running out of arguments. Their position has rested on the idea that Japan can make any American invasion so painful that the United States will eventually agree to terms. 2 atomic bombs have now demonstrated that the United States does not need to invade. It can destroy Japanese cities one by one from the air, with weapons that a single aircraft can carry. The Soviet invasion has simultaneously destroyed the large reserve of Japanese military strength sitting in Manchuria that the hardliners had been counting on as part of their defensive plan. The arithmetic of the situation has changed completely. On the night of August 9th, Emperor Hirohito meets with his cabinet and the Supreme Council in an emergency session that runs deep into the early hours of August 10th. The council remains deadlocked, 3 members for continuing the war and 3 members for accepting the Allied surrender terms laid out in the Potsdam Declaration. Under the Japanese system of government, the emperor does not typically make direct decisions. The council is supposed to reach its own consensus. But there is no consensus. The deadlock holds. Prime Minister Kantaro Suzuki does something that has almost never been done in the history of Japanese imperial governance. He turns to Emperor Hirohito directly and asks him to make the decision himself. Hirohito speaks. He tells the council that the war must end. He tells them that continuing to fight will only result in the complete destruction of the Japanese people. He references the atomic bombs. He references the Soviet entry into the war. He says that bearing what seems unbearable is sometimes what must be done. His voice, by multiple accounts from people present in the room, is calm. Japan formally notifies the Allied powers on August 10th that it is prepared to accept the terms of the Potsdam Declaration, with one condition, that the surrender terms allow the emperor to remain as Japan's ruler. The Allies respond that the emperor will be permitted to remain, but that his authority will be subject to the Allied commander overseeing the occupation of Japan. Japan accepts. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito records a message to the Japanese people, and it is broadcast on radio across the country at noon. It is the first time most Japanese people have ever heard their emperor's voice. He tells them the war is over. He does not use the word surrender. He tells them that Japan has accepted the terms of a declaration issued by its enemies, and that enduring the unendurable is now necessary. In cities and towns across Japan, people kneel in the streets and weep. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The announcement on August 15th stops the fighting, but the war is not yet officially over. There are still documents to be signed. There is still a formal ceremony to be arranged. The Allies want something concrete and visible, a moment that the entire world can point to as the clear and definitive end of the deadliest conflict in human history. That moment is being carefully planned, down to the exact position of every ship in the harbor where it will take place. Section 9. The Potsdam Conference and the Potsdam Declaration. Potsdam, Germany, July 17, 1945. The guns in Europe have been silent for 10 weeks. Germany is divided into 4 occupation zones, one controlled by each of the major Allied powers. The streets of Berlin are still full of rubble. The smell of smoke has not fully left the air, and in a suburb of that destroyed capital, the 3 most powerful leaders in the world are gathering for the last major Allied conference of the war. The meeting place is a palace called Cäcilienhof. It sits on the edge of a lake, surrounded by trees. It is intact, largely undamaged by the bombing that has torn apart the rest of the city around it. Inside its rooms, the leaders of the United States, the Soviet Union, and Great Britain are about to sit down and make decisions that will shape the world for decades to come. The American leader is Harry Truman. He has been president for only 3 months, having taken over after Franklin Roosevelt died of a brain hemorrhage on April 12, 1945. Truman is relatively unknown on the world stage. He has never met Stalin before. He arrives at Potsdam knowing that the atomic bomb has just been successfully tested in the New Mexico desert on July 16th, the day before the conference opens, and that he is carrying a secret that will change everything. The Soviet leader is Joseph Stalin. He has been running the Soviet Union since the late 1920s. He has presided over a war that has cost his country somewhere between 27 and 30 million lives. He arrives at Potsdam knowing that his armies occupy enormous stretches of Eastern Europe, and that this geographic reality gives him enormous power at the negotiating table. The British leader is Winston Churchill, the man who has led Britain through the darkest years of the war. But Churchill does not finish the conference. While the leaders are meeting in Potsdam, a general election is being held back in Britain. The results come in on July 26th. The British people, looking toward peace and the future, vote Churchill's Conservative Party out of power. Clement Attlee, the leader of the Labour Party, wins the election by a large margin and replaces Churchill at the conference table for the final days of the talks. The major questions at Potsdam center on what happens to Europe now that Germany is defeated. The leaders agree that Germany will be divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled respectively by the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France. Berlin, sitting deep inside the Soviet zone, will itself be divided into 4 sectors. The German military will be completely dismantled. The Nazi Party will be abolished. Its laws will be repealed. Germans involved in war crimes will be arrested and put on trial. The German educational system and legal system will be rebuilt from the ground up without any connection to the ideas that the Nazi government promoted. These decisions are agreed upon with relative ease. The harder questions involve Poland, the borders of Eastern Europe, and what the Soviet Union intends to do with the countries its armies now occupy. Truman and the Western Allies are deeply uncomfortable with the way Soviet-backed governments are being installed across Eastern Europe. Stalin is unyielding on these points. The disagreements at Potsdam do not break out into open conflict, but the cracks between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union are visible to everyone in the room. Within a few years, those cracks will become the Grill, defining division of the entire world. On July 24th, Truman approaches Stalin after one of the conference sessions and mentions, in a casual and deliberately vague way, that the United States has developed a new weapon of exceptional destructive power. He does not say the words atomic bomb. Stalin shows almost no visible reaction. What Truman does not know is that Soviet spies have already informed Stalin about the American atomic program in considerable detail. Stalin already knows what the weapon is. His outward calm is not surprise, it is preparation. The most significant document to come out of the Potsdam Conference is not the agreement about Germany. It is a declaration aimed at Japan. On July 26, 1945, the United States, Great Britain, and China issue what becomes known as the Potsdam Declaration. It is addressed directly to the government of Japan and to the Japanese people. Its message is stark and unambiguous. Japan must surrender unconditionally and immediately. All Japanese military forces everywhere in the world must lay down their weapons. Japanese territory will be occupied by Allied forces. Japanese leaders responsible for the decision to go to war will be removed from power and brought to justice. Japan as a nation will be allowed to continue to exist, and its people will be allowed to rebuild their lives, but only under the terms the Allies are now setting. The final line of the declaration states that the alternative to immediate surrender is prompt and utter destruction. Japan's Prime Minister, Kantaro Suzuki, responds publicly within days. He tells the Japanese press that his government will ignore the declaration and fight on. The Japanese word he uses is translated in different ways. Some translators say he calls the declaration not worthy of comment. Others say he calls it something to be killed with silence. The exact meaning of his statement becomes a point of historical debate. What is not debatable is the effect. The Allies interpret his response as a rejection. The decision that follows moves quickly. The atomic bomb that has just been tested in New Mexico is already being prepared for use. A second bomb is also being made ready. American commanders have a list of Japanese cities that have been identified as potential targets. The cities on the list have been deliberately kept off the standard bombing schedule so that the full effect of the atomic weapon can be assessed clearly when it is used. Hiroshima is at the top of the list. What the Potsdam Declaration sets in motion in the final days of July 1945 is a chain of events that takes less than 6 weeks to produce the complete and formal end of the war. But between the declaration and that final moment, the world will witness something it has never seen before and has not seen since. 2 cities destroyed by atomic weapons within 3 days of each other, a one-of-a-kind moment in human history that closes the deadliest war ever fought. The last act is already beginning, and its final scene will take place on the deck of a battleship, in a harbor, on a quiet September morning, with the whole world watching. Section 10. Japan's formal surrender. Aboard the USS Missouri, Tokyo Bay, Japan, September 2nd, 1945. Before 9 in the morning, the water is calm, the sky is clear. Spread across Tokyo Bay in every direction are 207 Allied warships, battleships, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and smaller vessels, representing the naval power of the nations that have fought Japan across 4 years of war in the Pacific. Among those ships is the battleship USS Missouri, anchored in the center of the bay. Its deck has been scrubbed clean. Its crew is in dress uniform. Above the ceremony area, an American flag has been mounted on the wall, the same flag that flew over the United States Capitol building on December 7, 1941, the day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. On a separate wall nearby, a faded and fragile old flag is also on display. It is the flag that American Commodore Matthew Perry carried when he sailed into this same bay in 1853, nearly a century earlier, and forced Japan to open its ports to the outside world. General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander for the Allied powers who will oversee the ceremony, has arranged every detail deliberately. Nothing about this morning is accidental. At 8:56 in the morning, the 11 Japanese delegates arrive on the deck of the Missouri. They have traveled from Tokyo by car, then transferred to a smaller vessel that brought them out to the battleship. The delegation is led by Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, who walks with a cane due to a leg he lost in an assassination attempt years earlier. Beside him is General Yoshijiro Umezu, representing the Japanese military. The 9 other delegates stand behind them. None of the Allied officers salute the Japanese delegation. The silence on the deck is heavy. General MacArthur steps to the microphone and speaks briefly. He says that the parties have gathered not in a spirit of hatred, but to work toward a future of dignity and peace. Then he invites the Japanese representatives to sign. Mamoru Shigemitsu signs first, on behalf of the Emperor of Japan and the Japanese government. The time is recorded as 9:04 in the morning. His hand is visibly unsteady as he writes. General Umezu signs second, on behalf of the Japanese military command. He signs stiffly, without expression. Then the Allied representatives sign. MacArthur signs first as Supreme Commander for the Allied powers. He uses several pens, stopping and starting, distributing the pens afterward to people who hold significance for him, including General Jonathan Wainwright, who had been forced to surrender the Philippines to Japan in 1942 and had spent the years since as a Japanese prisoner of war. Wainwright is standing on the deck of the Missouri this morning, thin and worn from his years of captivity, watching his country accept the surrender of the nation that held him. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz signs for the United States. Representatives of China, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, Australia, Canada, France, the Netherlands, and New Zealand each sign in turn. The ceremony takes 23 minutes. At 9:25 in the morning on September 2, 1945, MacArthur closes the proceedings. He speaks into a radio microphone that is broadcasting the ceremony live around the world. He says that a great tragedy has ended and a great victory has been won. He says that the guns are silent. Above the Missouri, at the exact moment the ceremony closes, hundreds of American carrier aircraft and B-29 bombers fly over Tokyo Bay in formation. The noise from their engines fills the air over the bay. The ships below sound their horns. Sailors climb onto the upper decks and look up. The sky over Tokyo Bay is full of Allied aircraft, and the war is over. The formal document signed on the deck of the Missouri is called the Japanese Instrument of Surrender. It runs 8 paragraphs. It states, in plain language, that Japan surrenders unconditionally to the Allied powers, that all Japanese military forces everywhere in the world will lay down their weapons immediately, that all Japanese commanders will issue the necessary orders to their forces without delay, that all Allied prisoners of war held by Japan will be released and cared for, that Japan will carry out all the requirements of the Allied powers fully and without resistance. 6 years and 1 day have passed since Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, and the war began. In those 6 years, the world has been consumed by a conflict on a scale that human beings had never before experienced. An estimated 70 to 85 million people are dead. That number includes soldiers killed in battle, civilians killed in bombing raids, people who died of starvation and disease caused by the war, and the 6 million Jewish people systematically murdered by Nazi Germany in the Holocaust, along with millions of others. Whole cities have been reduced to foundations. Entire populations have been displaced. Countries have been economically destroyed. The physical, human, and moral damage left behind by the war is larger than any accounting can fully capture. The United States emerges from the war as the most powerful nation on Earth. Its territory has not been invaded. Its factories have been running at full capacity for years, producing weapons and equipment that helped win the war. It is the only nation on the planet that possesses atomic weapons. The decisions made in Washington will shape the world in the years ahead more than the decisions made anywhere else. The Soviet Union has suffered more than any other nation and has also emerged with enormous military power and political influence across Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. The tension between the United States and the Soviet Union, already visible at Potsdam, will define the next 4 decades of world history. Japan begins its occupation under General MacArthur. The country will be rebuilt from the ground up, its government restructured, its military permanently dismantled, its constitution rewritten. The transformation of Japan in the years following the surrender becomes one of the most significant political and economic stories of the 20th century. The war is over. The world it produced is just beginning. What happened in those 6 years? The battles, the decisions, the weapons used, and the human cost paid does not belong only to the people who lived through it. The events that ended the deadliest war in human history were set in motion by choices made by specific people at specific moments, and understanding those choices is the only honest way to understand the world those choices left behind. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.